country. We spoke to Harriet Harman earlier, another figure of the left from that era, and of course from this era as well, as he continues to present on LBC 97.3 as the former Mayor of London, Ken Livingstone. You were responsible for the statue in Parliament Square during your mayoralty.
Well, I mean, and if you go back 1983-4, we commissioned a bus then, which you can still see down on the South Bank, and the guy who did it had to try and guess what he'd looked like, because you only had pictures that were sort of 20 years old, and Neil Kinnock unveiled that and so on. And if I think back to the 80s, the 70s, even went into the 90s, anyone sort of trying to defend Mandela and his party were all denounced as sort of terrorists, supporters and so on. And
he had advocated the use of violence.
Well, you didn't have any choice. Black people were denied the right to vote.
All terrorists say that.
No, but I'm afraid if Britain here, we didn't have the right to vote, there'd be armed groups struggling for democracy. And it was brutal. I mean, black people were kept in a sort of semi-slavery. I mean, my wife's father was a publisher, and he ran a scheme in the 1960s to get English books into black schools, because it was they weren't allowed. I mean, they could only have books in the local Afrikaans language, and of course they needed to read English and things like that. Anyone doing anything like that would be denounced as loony left and so on. And now, I mean, we're almost knocked over in the stampede of everyone to give praise. I was listening to Ferrari just before you came on air, where Boris was saying what a wonderful person he is. When we said we'd build that statue, Boris had only just written an article in the Telegraph saying this is a man who's imposed a black tyranny on the people of the whites of South Africa. There's an element of hypocrisy here that's pretty breathtaking, I have to say.
Well, you say that, Ken Livingstone, but I think if Nelson Mandela taught us anything, it would be forgiveness and the ability to change, wouldn't it? So perhaps you need to extend a little bit of Mandela understanding to Boris Johnson.
I'm just not in Nelson Mandela's league. I think if I'd been in prison for 27 years, I would have not have come out in a forgiving mood. That's what made him so remarkable. And I mean, so many of I met people, American presidents, British prime ministers, all that. But what was stunning about Nelson Mandela, when you actually met him, there was no vanity at all. He was just a nice, decent guy. He didn't have himself surrounded by a load of flunkies, no sort of self-importance or grandeur. He'd come in, the day we unveiled the statue in Parliament Square in 2007, came into breakfast, just sat down, chatted gently with everybody. I mean, there are a lot of politicians that you just want to get out of the room when they're in it, You just wanted to stay and see.
I'm saying nothing, Ken.
But that is it. I mean, to have achieved the position he did, and it didn't affect him. That's one of the real weaknesses of the political system. Some people get to the top, they go mad, frankly.
He wasn't a great president, though. I think history will probably attest to that.
I think I would have, of course, about 2 years before his release, I was part of a little group of left-wing economists, and we were approached by the ANC saying, it's being indicated he's going to be let out, we will become the government in a few years. Can you try and devise a sort of economic policy we follow? We came out saying quite radical, which they didn't do. And I suppose if Nelson Mandela had the chance to be president again, I think he'd be a bit more radical. They didn't make sufficient change to lift enough of local people out of the poverty that they're in.
Because power was inevitably the end in many ways, rather than the means to an end.
I mean, South Africa's tied up in the international financial system we've got. And it's not just in South Africa, it's everywhere. Which could almost lead us back to the confrontation in our own House of Commons yesterday. But no, I'm just proud that I met him. And
yes.
Literally, there aren't a lot of politicians I say that about.
Would the... it might be a whole new show.
I'll give you a list.
Yes, I was going to say, we can't do that on a Sunday morning. The question of his... I don't want to say importance, because that's an inadequate word, but would... people in this country, let us say, because it's the country we both know best, would people in this country have been so alive to the anti-apartheid cause if it hadn't been so powerfully embodied in not just one man, but this man? Did he somehow give a face to
Well,
the crime.
You just got to remember that Wembley concert back in the late 80s. And, you know, the album that was come out, you know, the Free Mandela album. But, I mean, if I go back to the 60s when a lot of debate about all of this, I can remember an awful lot of the people that were my neighbours or I worked with all saying, but, you know, you can't expect white people to live under a black government, you know. And says a lot about how far we've all come, that no one now bats an eyelid that you've got a black president of America. That's something that was inconceivable back in 50 years ago. And I think an awful lot of that is that Mandela so reassured a lot of the white insecurities that, you know, you can have a black government, they're not going to butcher.
And yet, it's not a country I know well, but it's far from the Elysian Fields,
oh God,
modern
no,
South Africa, and it's still riven with race-related division.
There's a long way still to go. And there is, I mean, still, I think we see London as very much, perhaps more than any other city in the world, the one where different racial and religious groups live side by side really easily, you know. No one blinks now if you see a mixed-race child. 50 years ago, people would have been shocked and horrified. We've come a long way, and Mandela's been a big part of that. I mean, because he embodied everything that can be best about a politician, and everyone calls him a statesman, but he was a politician as well. I just wish there were more of him.
Indeed. Ken Livingstone, you're back on air, of course,
Tomorrow morning.
on your own show tomorrow morning from 10 o'clock.
Oh, no, our show, David as well.
David Mellor and Ken Livingstone. Yes, you did hear me correctly. If you're not familiar with this regular broadcast, they'll be on LBC 97.3 tomorrow morning and every Saturday morning from 10 o'clock. Ken, thanks for your time.
Cheers.